For our next presenter, we have Vijay Sarvepalli.
Hello, good afternoon, and good evening for those past the GMT line on the other side. Thank you for joining. I'm going to share a set of slides with you and walk you through and introduce you to SSVC and how we have a pull request and a process for adding SSVC data into CVE records. And I'd like your feedback both in the pull request itself and in the whole idea of what we're doing now. So the idea is we're trying to explore the idea of sharing SSVC data. SSVC stands for Stakeholder-Specific Vulnerability Categorization. The idea is to basically share information about your vulnerability in the metrics section with information you actually know about a vulnerability as a CNA or as an ADP. That's the whole idea. Next slide. One more. This is just our about me. I work as a principal engineer at CERT in the division called the Threat Analysis of the Software Engineering Institute, which is part of Carnegie Mellon University. And my background is large-scale software, written software starting from early or mid-90s all the way to today in different forms, starting from the very popular frameworks like Java and others to the current Python and the more popular ASGI frameworks for pushing data and pulling data. That's my background. Next slide, please. Let me walk you through the agenda as to what we're going to hear about. I'll introduce what SSVC is, and I'll talk a little bit about SSVC adoption and usage, and what are we trying to do with the SSVC records, what the types of records that we want to produce, and how we can basically help you as a CNA producing these records or an ADP producing these records, or as a consumer consuming these records. How can you make sense of it? I'll walk through some examples and we'll have a Q&A time. Next slide, please. So the very short, very brief history. In 1988, Software Engineering Institute, there was at the Software Engineering Institute, SSVC was established to focus on coordination of vulnerability information. I'm going to come back to this idea of coordination of vulnerability information. That's being the key for this presentation. We want to coordinate between multiple stakeholders, what their view of a particular vulnerability is and how it can be consumed by different stakeholders at different stages of this CVE record being produced. In December of 2019, SSVC created this SSVC framework for basically categorizing vulnerability. It's a little bit of a flip of CVSS. The other way, instead of telling you what a vulnerability's score should be, we're trying to tell you how can you categorize it. You as a stakeholder can categorize a particular vulnerability to belong in XYZ category, right? Next slide. So since the introduction of SSVC in 2019, the biggest adopter has been CISA. As you might have seen, CISA adopted a specific version of their decision tree as to how they coordinate and assess a vulnerability. How do they make recommendation to the US government and to the public about SSVC? And that decision tree is something you can find at cisa.gov/SSVC. That's where, yes, Dave, it is meant to be that way. It was CVSS backwards is how SSVC came about. So SSVC, as it stands, was introduced and released with a kind of mock calculator in 2020, and it still exists today in CISA's website and in our website as well. And SSVC, after it was released, we've been maturing it and trying to find a way to present the data to the public as clear as possible and as simple as possible. And SSVC defines things called decision points. These are basically decision evaluations that a vendor or a consumer can do. And the decision tree puts all these decision points together as if they were a decision tree. Basically, a lookup ends up in what we call an outcome. And each one of these outcomes are distinct for each one of these, what we call stakeholders. Are very simple, big buckets of stakeholders are suppliers, people who produce software, deployers who basically will have to install something, a patch or whatever, coordinators who bring the suppliers, and typically suppliers and the researchers together so they can have a common understanding of a vulnerability and then release it, right? So SSVC data representation was released in September 2021. Then we gone through two major upgrades, version 1 and version 2. To this day, the very early data representation is close to what CISA produces today in their records. All right, next slide, please. Yeah, the thing to define here, some important points to define here. I'm going to go in a little different order than the way it's written. So the first thing to try to understand is, what is the SSVC decision point? It's essentially a question to determine a key property of a vulnerability. You're trying to ask a very specific question about the vulnerability to say what, like the example, what is the present state at this time of the exploitation of the vulnerability, or that is termed as exploitation, for example. That's a name given to the decision point. And there could be another decision point called automatable, which tries to clearly identify, can an attacker reliably automate creating exploitation events for this vulnerability or change them? Technical impact, what is the technical impact of the vulnerability? So I'll walk through some examples of this so you get an idea of it. At the end of the day, we want to try to help people give information that has as much as possible shared understanding. The greater the shared understanding, the less it's going to be very specific for you. But as you get specific to yourself, you can actually modify how the decision point matters for you to bringing what we call the outcome. The outcome could be a decision that helps you decide whether you want to patch, you want to defer, you want to ignore this particular vulnerability advisory for XYZ reason. You can basically build a table of this information to try to decide what you're going to do. So it's very different from the mathematical metric you get from CVSS. It basically tries to do a lookup and categorically an ordinal category, meaning ordered category like low, medium, high. You can actually, or the famous Likert scale, that you can actually move from one decision to another instead of saying 3.1 versus 9.8 or numbers like that. That's the idea. What we mean by stakeholders, at least some stakeholders have been clearly defined by us. There's many, many more. Obviously, as the software gets complex, there's many different ways of telling people what a stakeholder is. For these purposes, the monikers we're talking about are like suppliers who create software and who create the patches for the software, deployers who apply these patches to an operational environment most close to the operational use of the software, coordinators who manage communication between the suppliers, the finders, and the public, and the different stakeholders in that way. Next slide, please. Yeah, so the idea with these different monikers or actors in this in the storyline, they can basically share decision points, information available to them, to the public, and they can also optionally share what we call outcome. A supplier may decide to immediately patch something because of X, Y reasons, maybe exploitation is active and the impact is high, or the supplier might have delayed his release of a patch even after getting a particular information, and he could later, as he releases post what we call embargo, tell the people why it was delayed and what was actually the reasoning for them to pursue some patches to go out faster, to be immediate.
Organizó la cata de cervezas.
Yeah, can we're speaking, mute please. Yeah, thank you. So the deployer can use a decision point to derive at an outcome. The deployers also have their own decision to make, whether they want to defer or push a patch immediately or ignore a patch entirely as well. As examples, just as an acting global coordinator can share decision point to say they found a particular exploitation to be active, and they could actually recommend what they call an act or an attend. These are very clearly defined decision points as much as possible by CISA. Next slide, please. The links there are very useful. I'll hopefully put them also in the chat for you all to pick up. So we have a website where we actually have public information about SSVC itself, and a GitHub repository where you can raise issues. There's two tools at least called SSVC Explorer and Calculator. Both these tools are good ways for you to explore how SSVC works for these stakeholders which we predefine, calling deployer and supplier or what or not. And we have a Python package for basically creating SSVC records, and Python, the same package can be used for consuming records. All the decision points we've come up with so far, including the ones that is popular with CVSS, some of them are actually shared, are identified in this API tool we have. It's basically a Swagger tool for you to walk through the UVCon-based all the APIs we've predefined and how they work. So these really can help you basically read through and find out how SSVC decision point may be very viable way for you to communicate something you know about your the vulnerability as a CNA, and how that can help the consumers when they want to collect something. You can also create your own decision point using the SSVC Explorer, where you basically practically combine these decision points as we talked about, like exploitation and technical impact, say even 2 decision points to try to come up with your prioritization as to whether you want to defer or patch something, or you want to, as a supplier, pursue immediate patch of something and release of automated patching, or you want to delay it because of any reasons. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is the SSVC Explorer. This actually shows an example of it. It's practically a lookup table, and it's got all these different options. The options you can, for exploitation, for example, there's 3 defined ways of looking at exploitation. Either there is no exploitation, there's a public POC showing how the exploitation would be, or there's an active exploitation.
2 minutes.
Sorry, was there a question?
Sorry, it's the 2-minute warning.
Okay. Oh, very good. Then I can finish fast. Okay. The exploitation, the system exposure, automatable. These are very easy to basically capture, and the calculator basically shows you what we call a feature importance to find out how well designed your decision tree is in making good decisions, how much of the weight goes on each of these decisions as you go through. Next slide. This maybe is more popular, which is the SSVC calculator, which has been around with CISA. You can use this also to navigate. And this is currently it's automated where you can put the CV information in that little box and use the public CV API data provided by CISA to absorb information about a vulnerability, whether there's already exploitation and automatable is already being mentioned by somebody like CISA about a vulnerability. Next slide. So that's a pip package where there's an example of a decision tree using very, very classic your CS 101 decision tree example of weather forecast and humidity, helping you decide whether you should play or not. That's a game way of understanding a decision tree, and it kind of expands from that to making you walk through a decision tree for creating decision decision models that are sustainable, that'll give you reliable decisions about using the information you can get from a vulnerability. Next slide. Here is the API. Talk to you about the Swagger API. It helps you navigate all the decision points we've already defined. This can be used to validate your decision points, validate your decision trees to find out if what you built using our PIP tools is actually good. Is it solid? Is it provide enough reliability and consistency in answering questions in a proper way? And is the question simple enough? Those kind of things you can ask from it. Next slide. So the question as to how would you create and consume these records. So the current CV JSON format has a metric field called other, where today these records are going. We're hoping to basically push it into a formalized way that in a consistent way people can consume these records. And this particular one is sharing the information about exploitation. There's a minimal record shown on the left. There's a little bit more human readable, so to speak, description of the decision point in the middle, and the right side is very prose language about what is it that you're reading. Next slide. So the next two slides try to describe how to create and how to consume SSVC records. Basically helps you use our search SSVC Python library to create an SSVC record and then dump it out. And that will look like the one you saw just earlier. And the next slide, because I don't have time to dwell on this. Hopefully you get to read this thing. Actually helps you consume this record. The SSVC records have the idea of time based on them. So you can actually mature your records as you go through time to say more information you have about a vulnerability, or something has changed about a vulnerability, like the exploitation has become available, you can become aware of it. So using this logic that's described in there in the pseudocode and expressed in somewhat of Python-like language, you can walk through it to try to pull out information about a decision and decision point information that was shared by somebody like a supplier or an ADP. Next slide. Sorry, I got to rush through all these. So here's an example of data flow scenarios where somebody like a supplier might know very well defined for everybody understanding of what a particular decision point like exploitation may be, because it's publicly known or not known that there's an exploit available for this vulnerability. Something like a technical impact will be very closer to a deployer, and an operator might have even more information on a mission impact, which is an extension of the technical impact to their mission, depending on the human impact and the social impact or financial impact. All those can be bundled into this mission impact. So an operator can basically, every vulnerability goes through this chain of information to get more and more mature. So by the time an operator makes a decision, it's very, very viable for them to know exactly how solid their decision is, how much information they have that they collected all the way from the horse's mouth, so to speak, from the supplier. Next slide. This is prompts for questions. I'm sorry, I didn't realize I was this slow in speaking, but here I'm at the end. For whatever few seconds we have, these are the questions I sort of put out there to try to engage in a conversation. I'll put a link to the PR, the pull request where we described this particular idea of including this in the CV record and what does it mean for the consumer. It's already in the pipeline for the 6.0 release in January or so. We'd love to have your feedback or your changes, your recommendations in the document. Most of these questions are already answered if you walk through the question and answer in the PR, but you're welcome to raise more discussion there. The time being short here, I can't tell you much more about these questions itself that I came up with. Over and out. Thank you.